It's my privilege tonight to have the honor to introduce Ben Bradlee. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on Ben. You all know who he is. If you don't, he shouldn't be here. Except to say a couple of things. A long time ago, in Ben's house in Georgetown, he reached out his hand to me, and I grabbed it and came with him from the Washington Star. There used to be a paper called the Washington Star, to the Post to join his team. And it was the most wonderful thing that ever happened to me in my life, and I still feel that way tonight as I am about to introduce Ben. The thing that was wonderful about it, though, you've had joining a paper with Ben as the editor, building his paper and his staff and his team. This was long before Watergate. And then you had Herb over there, and Herb was the most wonderful person you could possibly believe. He would come around every night, something I've never forgotten. You'd see around 5:15 in your office, there'd be this figure standing at the doorway, shy and diffident, with a glint in his eye, with a sheaf of papers in his hands, and he would say, "Hey, you got a mow? Come on in, Herb." And then he'd shuffle out like poker cards, 5 or 6 original cartoons for that next morning's paper. They were all brilliant, wonderful, and totally different. And you look at them and say this or that. And he did this around the newsroom. And I've always treasured that moment. Have I got a mow? We've got a lot of mow for Herb. The thing about Ben, I have to tell you a personal story. When I joined his group, his team, his paper, it was a great paper, but it couldn't have happened despite all the glory of Ben Bradlee and Herb Bloch. The reason that they were able to succeed and prosper, and the reason they were able to do the great works they did, is because they worked for a great owner. Kay Graham and her father, Eugene Meyer, gave the independence and the backing for the kinds of work that Herb would do, even if they didn't agree with it or appreciate or even paid a price for it. And what Kay did in her tenure as the owner of the paper, giving Ben his license and free hand, and the rest of us the right to be wrong, was still, to me, an extraordinary lesson for what journalism is or should be. And they couldn't have happened without that kind of ownership of the paper. And I'd like to say, thank God it existed. It doesn't always exist today. With Ben, in a personal relationship, a dear friend of mine named Dick Harwood, who was also hired away to come to work for Ben. And we were sitting around one night talking at great length about how we loved Bradlee, we were so proud of the Post, glad to be there, et cetera, et cetera. And Dick, who had been a tough Marine, had his lung shot out on Tarawa, landed at Iwo Jima with the Marines, said, "I'd follow Bradlee anywhere." I said, "So would I." And then he said, "I'd do this." And I said, "So would I." And he finally said, "I'd jump off the building for Bradlee." And I said, "You know, I'm not about to jump off the building for Ben Bradlee. Ben, I would still follow you anywhere, but I'll be damned if I'll jump off that building."
I believe it about Harwood. I'm not so sure about you, Johnson. I'm not so sure. What an honor it is to stand up in honor of Herb, that quiet, brilliant, warm and funny man, that unassuming, gentle man with a heart of gold and the kick of a mule when he put his head in his hand and started to draw. And Haynes took most of the rest of my introduction. But how easy it is for me to remember the first time I saw him. It was probably right after Christmas in 1948, almost 56 years ago. And I was the greenest of green reporters, and Herb was already the miracle great Herb Bloch. The paper at that time, I've got to say it, consisted mostly of the Graham family, Herb Elliston and the editorial page, Shirley Povich, the sports editor, columnist, writer, everything, and Herb. That's why the paper had that reputation. That's why all over the world, people, beginners like myself, flocked to it. And what Haynes was talking about, to see Herb emerge at 5 o'clock every afternoon with those drawings, was one of the most unforgettable feelings. The real unforgettable feeling was when he showed some of them to you. That meant that you had joined some miracle club, and it isn't as if at that time I was covering anything worth covering. I was covering a vice squad chief who had a little morality problem of his own, and a chief of police who was just flat out crooked. But when Herb showed me a picture, one of the 5 was of that, I basked. I just felt unbelievably good. You, Gene, you, Frank, and what a wonderful job you're doing with this, and I'm so excited about it. And Matt Davis, how lucky we are to have you as the first honoree. The other day, I was having lunch with 2 old political buddies, Jerry Rafshoon, who was one of President Jimmy Carter's right-hand man, and John Riley, who held a same position in Mondale's camp. I think I saw John here, but I'm going to tell it anyway. I found myself telling them, saying that I'd heard this fabulous story the night before, really a fabulous story. And as I started to tell it, there was a slight trouble. I couldn't remember it for the life of me. And worse still, I couldn't remember who had told it to me. Rafshoon, who is a younger man than I am, said, and he's got a better memory, said surprisingly that he knew who had told me, his wife, because he had told her the story. But he said sheepishly, as he started to tell the story, he couldn't remember it either. We had to call his wife from the lunch table to refresh our mind. And now that I've remembered it, I'm going to tell it to you. Plus, it's written here. Seems that the big shots at the Augusta National Golf Club had decided that they would invite Vernon Jordan to become a member. Not the first black man to be invited to join, but damn near. And Jordan could barely control his excitement. But not so fast, they said. There was one condition attached. Jordan would have to sign a piece of paper promising the Board of Governors that he would never invite his good friend President Clinton to play a round of golf at the fabled course. Jordan stroked his chin, pondering his dilemma for a few minutes, the story went, and then said, "Give me that paper, I'll sign it." But the trouble is, apparently, the story isn't true. Journalists like to joke that some stories are too good to check, and this story sure seemed like one of them to me. We knew our source, we knew her source. What the hell, that's enough, that's 2 sources. But we still had to check it, and Vernon denied it. How shall I put this delicately enough for this crowd? Categorically. Anyway, my favorite definition of journalism comes from the great Stanley Walker, perhaps the greatest of the legendary New York City editors from the good old days more than 60 years ago. "A newsman knows everything," he wrote. "He is aware not only of what goes on in the world today, but his brain is a repository of the accumulated wisdom of the ages. He is not only handsome, but he has the physical strength which enables him to perform great feats of energy. He can go for nights without sleep. He dresses well. He talks with charm. Men admire him. Women adore him. Tycoons and statesmen are willing to share their secrets with him. He hates lies and meanness and sham, but he keeps his temper. He's loyal to his paper, and when he dies, a lot of people are sorry, and some of them remember him for several weeks. Walker, of course, was right back then, and when we get together by ourselves, we often think that he still is. But I have become more and more convinced that the best journalists today are the best lie detectors, not just the angry, relentless skeptics who automatically disbelieve everything, but the reporters who instinctively are alert to the possibility that their sources don't know what they're talking about, for various reasons. Some of them are making it up. Some of them don't know that they don't know. Some of them leave out vital details that would tend to discredit it. And some of them, you'll be shocked to hear, deliberately lie. It seems to me that lying has reached epidemic proportions in our culture recently, and that we've all become immunized to it. Lying has become just another tool for making deals, for selling beer or war, soap or candidates. To make the subject manageable for tonight, I'd like to narrow the list to political lying and concentrate on lying by the executive branch of government, mostly by presidents. If we cannot trust our presidents, I have said often to myself, who can we trust? If our leaders lie routinely, why should we follow? Or even worse, why at all? Why should we think about it? My concern about lying has made it difficult for me to believe the official version of anything. And I don't think I'm not particularly proud of that. I don't think that's a good position for society. My concern started with Vietnam, this difficulty to believe the official version of anything. The establishment began to feel that it had to lie, just to justify a policy that, as it turned out, was never going to work. It mushroomed during the counterculture days when the sacred protective shrouds were ripped from every institution in our society. Government itself, the church, schools, colleges, family, sexual relations, business, especially big business, the Boskis, the Milkins, the barbarians at the gates, and of course the press, which was on hand to record the ripping of the shrouds with glee. Some thought too much glee. One by one, these institutions got a hard second look from the new generation, the first hard look from citizens of the information age. And what they saw was awesome change. Vietnam, the counterculture, Haight-Ashbury, drugs, the Pentagon Papers, Watergate, and Nixon's exile to disgrace, the SNL scandals, Iran-gate, the Gulf War, they were all great stories, historical turning points that had to be covered with energy and intelligence, and when they were, the lies became visible. They all involved lying by the elected and self-appointed leaders of our society. The official account of what was happening in Vietnam seriously damaged the habit, the truth to the politicians caught in its jaws and to the press caught up in a web of lies. Just one incident hidden away in the Pentagon Papers, which half of you are probably not old enough to remember, which of course no one ever read. When Johnson sent his Secretary of Defense, Bob McNamara, to Vietnam soon after he succeeded Kennedy, he wanted the whiz kid McNamara to give him a new, fresh look at how the war was going. It was the end of December or early January 1964. McNamara toured the battlefields, listened to the general's briefing for 3 days. When he left Vietnam, he held a press conference at Tan Son Nhut Airport, proclaiming that he was much encouraged, that the South Vietnamese had shaped up, that all signs pointed towards progress. It was not, quote, the light at the end of the tunnel speech, but it was close. When he landed at Andrews Air Force Base, he told reporters pretty much the same thing. He said, going to tell the president how much things had improved, and he took a helicopter into the White House and disappeared. And nobody knew what he told the president.